Good morning, students. Today we are going to see about the lumbar vertebra. There are total 5 lumbar vertebra, out of which the first 4 lumbar vertebra, they are typical lumbar vertebra, and the fifth one is the atypical lumbar vertebra. Now let us compare the lumbar vertebra with the other vertebrae that we have studied, that is the thoracic vertebra and the cervical vertebra. You can see this is the thoracic vertebra. The thoracic vertebra is having a small heart shape of the body, and it has got costal facets on the sides of the body and the transverse process for the attachment of the ribs. Whereas if you see the lumbar vertebra, it has got a large reniform shape of the body. So the largest of all the vertebra is the lumbar vertebra, having a large reniform shape of the body. If you see at the sides of the body, there are no costal facets for the attachment of the ribs. Okay, and as in the case of the cervical vertebra, you see a foramen transversarium. Okay, but in the lumbar vertebra, it does not show the presence of the foramen transversarium. The spine of the typical cervical vertebra is short and bifid spine. Here you can see it is short and bifid spine. Whereas the lumbar vertebra, the spine, it is quadrangular, thick quadrangular shaped spine, which is thickened along its posterior and the inferior border. Now let us discuss the parts of the lumbar vertebra one by one. First, let's see about the body of the lumbar vertebra. This is the large, massive, reniform or kidney shaped body of the lumbar vertebra. Here you can see that the transverse diameter, it is more as compared to the antero-posterior diameter. Also you can see the body, it is constricted in the front and along the sides. So there are constriction present along the front and along the sides. Here you can nicely appreciate the constriction present on the body. The size of the lumbar vertebra, it progressively increases from the first to the fifth lumbar vertebra. If you see the anterior surface of the body, this is the anterior surface of the body. The length of this anterior surface of the body, it is slightly more as compared to the length of the posterior surface. And because of the length of the anterior surface is more, that is why the lumbar spine, it is convex anteriorly. That is also called as lumbar lordosis. As I have already shown, it does not bear any kind of costal facets on the sides of the body. Now let us come to the vertebral foramen. Here you can see this is the vertebral foramen of the lumbar vertebra. The shape of the vertebral foramen, it is appearing to be triangular in shape. Now let us compare this vertebral foramen with that of the other vertebra. This is the thoracic vertebra, where this is the vertebral foramen. Now you can appreciate that the vertebral foramen of the lumbar vertebra, it is larger in size as compared to that of the thoracic vertebra, but it is smaller in size as compared to the vertebral foramen of the cervical vertebra. Now this vertebral foramen of the first lumbar vertebra, it contains the conus medullaris. Now what is conus medullaris? Conus medullaris, it is the triangular lower portion of the spinal cord. All of you must be knowing that the spinal cord, it ends at the lower border of L1. So this vertebral foramen of first lumbar vertebra L1, it contains the conus medullaris. Whereas the vertebral foramen of the other lumbar vertebra, they contain the cauda equina. That is like likened to a tail of a horse. These are the bunch of nerves formed by the lower four lumbar and the sacral and the coccygeal nerves. They form the cauda equina. Now let us come to the other parts of this lumbar vertebra. Now these are the pedicles. The pedicles, they are short and strong, and you can see that they are directed backward. The pedicles, they are attached to the body along its upper part. So here you can see there's formation of the superior vertebral notch, and this is the inferior vertebral notch. You can nicely appreciate that the inferior vertebral notch, it is much deeper as compared to the superior vertebral notch. Let us see about the lamina of the lumbar vertebra. You can see here, these are the lamina. These are short, thick and the broad plates. They are directed posterior-medially and they fuse together, the lamina fuse together to form the spine. Now, if you articulate the adjoining lumbar vertebra, here you can see that there is minimal overlapping between the lamina of the adjoining vertebra. Let us see the spine of the lumbar vertebra. This is the spine of the lumbar vertebra. It is in a form of thick, broad, quadrangular plate that is almost directed backward and slightly downwards. You can see the spine is thickened along its posterior border and inferior border. These are the transverse processes of the lumbar vertebra. The transverse processes, they are thin and tapering. These transverse processes, these are homologous to the ribs of the thoracic region. Along the posterior inferior aspect of the transverse process, you can appreciate the presence of a rough elevation. You can see the rough elevation along the posterior inferior aspect. These are called as the accessory processes. These accessory processes, they are the true transverse process of the vertebra. On the anterior surface of the transverse process, you can appreciate the presence of a faint vertical ridge. On the anterior surface, there is presence of a faint vertical ridge. These are the superior articular processes. As you can see, these bear the superior articular facets. These facets, they are concave. You can appreciate these superior articular facets, they are concave and they are directed backwards and medially. These are the inferior articular processes. These inferior articular processes bear the inferior articular facets. These facets, as you can appreciate, these are convex. And the inferior articular facets, they are directed forwards and laterally. They are directed forwards and laterally. Now, if you compare the superior and the inferior articular facets, the distance between the two superior articular facets, it is more as compared to the distance between the two inferior articular facets. Along the posterior border of the superior articular facets, here you can see an elevation. Okay, these are called as the mammillary processes. So these are the accessory processes along the root of the transverse process, which represent the true transverse process of the lumbar vertebra, and this is the mammillary process along the posterior border of the superior articular facet. Now let us see about the atypical lumbar vertebra. As we have already discussed, the fifth lumbar vertebra is the atypical lumbar vertebra. So what are the features that are different from the typical lumbar vertebra? First, let us see about the body of the fifth lumbar vertebra. This is the fifth lumbar vertebra, and you can see the massive size of the body. The body, it is the largest of all the lumbar vertebra. If you see the height of the anterior surface of the body, it is more as compared to height of the posterior surface of the body. If this lumbar vertebra, this is the fifth lumbar vertebra, now I am articulating it with the sacrum. Now here you can nicely see, appreciate the articulation between the fifth lumbar vertebra and the sacrum. Because of the height of the anterior surface of the body is more as compared to the posterior surface, here you can see in the articulation an angle is formed between the fifth lumbar and the body of the sacrum. This is called as lumbosacral angle. This is about 120 degrees. The fifth lumbar vertebra, now you can see the spine. This is the transverse process of the fifth lumbar vertebra. It has got a thick, short and pyramidal shaped transverse process. You can see the whole thickness of this pyramidal shaped transverse process, it is attached to the pedicle, and also the transverse process, it is encroaching the sides of the body. These are the superior articular facets of the fifth lumbar vertebra. You can see they are directed more backward than medially. These are the inferior articular facets. These inferior articular facets, they are directed more forward than laterally. Now in the fifth lumbar vertebra, if you see the distance between the superior articular facets and the inferior articular facets, the distance is the same. So this is the identifying feature of the fifth lumbar vertebra. This is how you can easily differentiate the fifth lumbar vertebra from the other lumbar vertebrae. The distance between the superior articular facets and the inferior articular facets is the same, whereas in typical lumbar vertebra, the distance between the superior articular facets is more as compared to the inferior articular facets. Let us see about its spine. You can see again it has got a thick, broad, quadrangular spine. The spine of the typical lumbar vertebra, it is directed almost backwards and slightly downwards. But here in this fifth lumbar vertebra, you can appreciate the downward inclination of the lumbar spine. So in this video, we have seen the features of the typical lumbar vertebra and the fifth lumbar vertebra, which is the atypical lumbar vertebra. The attachments of the lumbar vertebra we are going to study in the next video.